In 2016, terrorists stormed into an upscale cafe in Dhaka in Bangladesh, took those eating there as hostage, and killed 22 people. There was one man that evening who could have escaped, but he chose to stay on, refusing to abandon his friends. Faraaz, the new production by Hansal Mehta, is a film for our times. It explores not just courage, it goes further than exploring courage and vulnerability. It also explores violence. It asks that most fundamental of questions: why do two people from seemingly a similar background go in two completely different directions? Why does one young man pick up a gun and the other young man become the person who decides to stay back and die for the sake of his friends? The film chronicles the story of five radicalized young Muslim men who are the terrorists who storm into this cafe, but it also, in the end, tells the human story of this brave man called Faraz. Director Hansal Mehta has called it a version of the Archies gone dark, a Riverdale cafe for our times. What could he possibly mean? Let's go across now to Hansal Mehta, who's with us, and we're also joined by the two key protagonists of the film, Aditya Rawal and Zahan Kapoor. It's great to see you all. I was able to watch a preview version of the film, and I can imagine that it's going to trigger a whole lot of debate. In fact, it already has, both within India and in Bangladesh. Let me start with you, Hansal. I mean, when I think of a Riverdale cafe, for these times, the Archie's gone dark, it's a kind of macabre image. And you've never shied away from a macabre, chronicling a macabre reality. And yet there is a core of hope at the heart of it. And that is the story of this young boy who could have gone away, saved his life, and he doesn't. So hope in the middle of a macabre reality, is that really the defining spirit of Faraz?
Yes, it is. I think it is also the spirit of our times. We are living in very polarized times where we don't trust the other. We are polarized about everything: religion, caste, politics, food, everything. We are so polarized that it's difficult to find hope in that. And in this story, very grim, claustrophobic tale set over one night, I found this hope, and this hope in the most ordinary of places. A young man who he's not trained like the commando in Uri, to just enter, single-handedly enter and take on another army, but he's armed with a clean and an open heart. And that, I thought, that is a kind of story that I must tell. It sort of takes the storytelling of Shahid forward. When Rajkumar saw this film, he said, "Oh, your trilogy is complete." So he meant Ometa in between. But it takes the story of Shahid forward in many ways. The young radicalized Muslim. So Shahid was both these characters. A
Yeah.
radicalized young man who then takes on the path of goodness and then ultimately loses his life, but leaves the world with hope. And I think Faraz uh, is about what, like him, what could have been, and him, what is.
Yeah, and it's important to tell our audience that this is not a fictional question. This is a real question. There was a real Faraz, and there was a real person who could have died but chose not to. And as Hansel says, he wasn't a trained soldier, or he wasn't a trained commando. Before I go to Aditya and Zahan, Hansel, I have one more question for you. The Archie's gone dark. I think one of the things you're doing is puncturing or powering through the kind of glossy, beautiful people representation of young people in cinema that we see so often. And I think you've spoken about how young people in that sense have been prototyped by the industry often. Why was it that important to you to, in a way, bust the sort of candy floss, soft filter representation of young people in our cinema?
It's not. I'm not trying to bust it. I'm trying to understand the young people better, and to tell you that these are the young people that inhabit our world today. They're thinking young men with conviction, with articulation, with the capability to articulate. In fact, the lead terrorist played by Aditya is an articulate young man. They're articulate. The problem is that we don't try to understand them, and we don't seek an understanding of these characters. And that's what I meant by Archies gone macabre, gone dark, gone completely wrong. But yeah, I mean, I was just trying to explore young minds in that moment, and also trying to break number of stereotypes. One of the young people, either completely in a attention deficit kind of coma, and of Muslims, Muslim terrorists, so the stereotype of men in skull caps with surma in their eyes, it has become synonymous with terrorism. So I wanted to break those stereotypes. I mean, stop, the othering of communities is more so because in our films we stereotype them. Not every Parsi speaks like he's singing. Not every Hindu wears a tilak on his forehead. And not many Muslims wear skull caps and surma and 3/4 baggy Pathani suits.
Yeah. In fact, the two young men that Aditya and Zahan play are both sort of educated. You're also looking at this idea of someone who comes from a regular middle class background, who may in fact have socioeconomic privilege, who may come from a decent university, but will still pick up the gun. And that's really, in a sense, what the film explores. But on the other side, there's a Faraaz who just comes back from studying abroad and refuses to abandon his friends. Now, Zahan and Aditya, you guys are, in a sense, those two key protagonists. Zahan is as Faraaz, and you, Aditya, of course, play one of those 5 terrorists who storms that cafe. And Hansal is exploring how your journeys have gone very different ways. So let me first actually ask you, how old are both of you in real life, Zahan and Aditya? I just want to know that, not to be an old auntie, but because I want to understand how young people think today, and it might be very, very different from how we and people of Hansal and my generation think. Aditya?
So we are actually both closer to 30 than we are to 20. So there is that, so we do, I think it was, I would say, that little bit of...
But you were closer to the 20s when we shot the film.
Perhaps, yes. Yes. For sure. Yeah.
And Zahan was very close to his 20s when he was cast for the film.
I'll tell you why. I may seem ageist. I'll tell you why I asked this question. I think there's a sort of generational gap in what one generation talks about and another generation cares about. And I'm very intrigued, before I get to your characters, about asking you, because Hansal is sitting there saying, you don't have to just prototype the young in our cinemas. They're also thinking people, they're also going through visceral realities. And so how difficult was it for both of you to, in a sense, play these parts? Zahan, I'll start with you. You're the good guy in a way. So I don't know if that makes it easier, but it's also a big sort of burden of responsibility to capture the essence of this young man who could have lived but chose to die to save his friends.
Absolutely. I think it's a huge responsibility, and it's one that I think Hansal sir made us aware of right from the get-go. With regards to just being a young person and being, I think when you are confronted with dogma or ideology, and you are, as a young person, you are told that you don't have the wherewithal yet, you are not capable yet, you have no right actually to raise your voice and be quiet and listen to what I'm telling you. As against the idea being that, you know what, I'm here, I'm looking at this the same way you're looking at this. And I think I have a different interpretation. I think I have a different point of view here. And you're not allowing me to even express it. It may not be as informed as yours, but it's as truthful, in a sense that we all carry our inner truth. And the beautiful thing, I think, about exploring this story and of trying to interpret it and bring it to life on screen has been that both Aditya and I are people who quite geeky and nerdy when it comes to these things, and we like to do deep dives. We like to be well read and research and kind of have these conversations. And part of our preparation was about understanding the world, understanding the history, understanding the tenets of Islam. We had a tremendous coach, Ikhlaq Khan, who came and taught us about the Quran Sharif, about the surahs, about the interpretations, the mixed interpretations. He taught us how to perform namaz, how to offer prayer. Aditya and I both went into, from the history of Islam to its modernization, to every step of the way. Bangladesh, the formation of East Pakistan, the formation of the revolution of Bangladesh. It was done on terms of language, not on religion. It was done on terms of a cultural identity, not on anything else. And how all of this, and how we would have been brought up, given how Faraaz would have been brought up, how he would have been informed by his faith, by his belief system, to act on principle, to be a humanitarian first, to be generous and kind, to engage when it is required. And I think we found some echo of that in our own lives, and I think it enabled us to kind of be truthful about interpreting the story as well.
That's fascinating that you actually did all that reading, and of course, India had our sort of role in birthing an independent Bangladesh. Aditya, now you're one of the 5 terrorists, right? And I think the point that Hansal wants the audience to understand is that you could have gone potentially the same way as Faraaz, but you didn't. And in today's world, when radical Islam and political Islam is in some parts of the world a reality, on the other hand, Islamophobia is also a reality. How do you navigate that character?
So, I think, as you said, as Sir said, from the get-go, our first discussion involved an understanding that this is not your run-of-the-mill, hired gun, narebaz cinematic terrorist, right? The whole idea was finding the humanity underneath the layers of this brutality, right? You made a very interesting point about the different times and how certain generation, the next generation doesn't necessarily care about what the previous generation cared about. But, there is the point that Zahan made, right? It's inner truth is universal. So the means might be different. There might be radicalization through social media today, but there was radicalization previously as well. In the case of these people, I think the understanding that I came to is that, of course, as you know better than most, there are many reasons why one turns to terrorism or is radicalized or, becomes a fundamentalist. In the case of most of these boys, it was that they were lonely, young, angry, vulnerable men who got the wrong support system at the worst possible time in their lives. As you said, they could have taken a very different path if they found the right support system, because these people are, like you said, articulate, intelligent, and they're driven. They could have very easily been, world leaders or sportsmen. The example I gave earlier as well is that you have your American films, your boxing films, or sports films. There's a kid in the hood who lives a rough life, is involved in small crimes, and he can go down a really dark path, but he finds a retired coach in the neighborhood who's running a boxing gym. And suddenly he's a boxer. He may or may not become a champion, but he's got a motive in life. He's got a place to channelize his energy, of which there is, a lot as a young man. So I think it was understanding those layers as opposed to, trying to find or trying to recreate what we've seen in cinema before this.
Yeah, the granularity, as it were, of the real world. But Hansal, since you mentioned the sort of polarities we live with, there are certain conversations it's actually become very difficult to have. You have those conversations and you will be labeled, right? You in particular have confronted some of those labels before. You could face the danger of being sort of labeled an apologist for terrorism when you raise the question about why a young man or woman picks up a gun. How do you, because you're not a political activist, you're a movie maker. You want the maximum number of people to watch your movie, to like your movie. And yet you need to remain true to your core beliefs. How do you address this potential question that might be asked of you, Hansal? Are you rationalizing terrorism by asking these questions?
No, I'm rationalizing the fact that terrorists are also human beings. I'm saying that, look at them as human beings, try to understand, try to get to the bottom of radicalism, and try to understand what drives an IB educated boy to radicalization, what makes him such a brutal animal, and what is his interpretation of religion that drives you so crazy. I mean, he recites a surah, towards the second half of the film, and with passion. He's got tears in his eyes. And I mean, really, did you really interpret it? Were you that passionate that you thought it justified violence? So these are the questions that, I mean, we have to ask. You see, the problem is that these questions about radicalism have been co-opted by those who want to stereotype radicalism. And we have let it happen. We've let it happen in our cinema, everywhere. We've let it happen because we say, I don't want to, face uncomfortable questions. I don't want to be trolled. I want to have a popular voice. I want to be liked. And I've realized over the years, I don't necessarily want to be liked all the time. I want my cinema to be remembered for opening up some sort of a conversation. You might disagree with me, but at least you're talking about it. And it's for too long that we have this good versus bad has been co-opted, and it has become one-dimensional. It's been co-opted by the forces that benefit from making the bad into stereotypes.
So let me ask both Zahan and Aditya whether there was an assumption. Zahan, I'll ask you first. Whether was there an assumption going in that you may have had from afar that as you started researching your character, Bangladesh, ISIS, terrorism, you were surprised to discover?
There were so many surprises and so many discoveries. So much about how easily narratives get shaped depending on the outcome you are trying to reach. And the realization is that that has far more to do with the context of the time in which we're talking than it does with the thing itself. So, for example, the understanding or the realization that even in the early age of Islam, there were so many reinterpretations, so many conflicting versions of what is the right way, and how we reference that going forward, and how those become the basis of culture. And we look back and say, no, this is the marker, this is the anchor point. But that anchor point actually was itself not talking about the origin. It was actually a couple of 100 years later. So isn't it more telling of the context? So isn't our film more telling of the fact that it's not even about Islam as much as it is about young people today feeling frustrated, disempowered, empowered, confused, and having to bear witness to something that is happening in front of them, but being told that this is all coming from somewhere completely different. And I think Faraaz symbolizes that. He is the ultimate witness, the idea of shahadat, that you bear witness to something and it can take your life to bear that witness. So it is a young boy who witnessed a manipulation, a corruption of an ideology to justify something. And he, from a personal place, saying that, no, this has given me strength, has given me compassion, has given me a sense of faith in humanity and humane values. How dare you use this against me? And that kind of, as cliched as it sounds, not in my name kind of a thing. So it talks much more about us today than it talks about Islam or anything else, or terrorism at large and why it happens in history.
Yeah.
There's also this subtext about privilege, with Zahan's character. That he comes from a place of privilege. Yet he does not have, within his privileged home, he does not have a voice. He's been told that, Stanford is good for you. That you should go to Stanford. Your future is necessary for us. And there's this constant feeling of privilege and how he breaks free. There are stereotypes of the privilege. There is this constant trolling that, if you're rich, then you're spoiled. So he also breaks that stereotype of a privileged young man.
And I found it particularly interesting, and let me give the last word to Aditya, that Zahan frames it almost as a larger question of a generation that may not feel that it perfectly fits, that is often directed by someone or the other, by norms, by parents, by peers, to be a certain way. And what happens when you find yourself to not fit in completely? And, there are many generational arguments that take place. There are any number of WhatsApp uncles, as they're called. In our own families, we're constantly arguing amongst ourselves. Almost nobody agrees on anything anymore. We live in a very argumentative age, Aditya. Do you want your character to start an argument, or do you believe that there are certain things that we should be able to agree on?
See, I think disagreement is healthy. It's perfectly acceptable. In fact, it leads to progress. But the trouble with, today's day and age and the algorithm is it leads you down this rabbit hole and takes you further and further away from points of view that might be conflicting to yours. And that is really dangerous. It is propaganda like there has been for centuries on end, but it is just more effective, and that is more frightening. So I feel like a film like this, that is why I find great value in our film, apart from the hope that it is an engaging film as a piece of drama. The value is that here you have these two conflicting points of views presented by a filmmaker who's known to sort of stir debate. And both the point of views have been given a really solid platform. None have been shortchanged. And yet one, hopefully in the film, at least in the film, one wins out. And you hope that in real life as well, that is the one that, wins out. It is the point of view of, a sense of rationality, a moderation, if not in your interpretation of the religion, but at least in the way of conducting yourself in society, because of course, eventually we all have to live together.
Yeah. So I'll tell you one stereotype that both of you may have battled is being seen through the prisms of your famous fathers and grandfathers, and an assumption being made that these are young boys of privilege. Oh, this is they're going to have it easy. All of that, and I think just for people to hear how thoughtfully you have applied your minds, how much you've read, how much you've prepared, is a stereotype being busted right there. So, when we talk about stereotypes and how we box people in, I think you both demonstrated a great deal of thoughtfulness in this conversation. I hope many people watch the film. It doesn't matter if you don't agree with Hansal Mehta. You don't have to agree with his vision. He wants you to think. He wants you to talk. He wants you to be able to talk in a civil way about things that many people are too scared to talk about. And that is why I hope many people will watch this film. Good luck to Zahan, to Aditya, and to Hansal. A pleasure talking to you. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.